The webinar's live.
Thank you very much, Noreen, and welcome to the December meeting of Cheshire CCG's governing body. My name's Dr. Wilson. I'm the chair of the CCG. Other colleagues will introduce themselves. I would suggest they introduce themselves when they first speak. This is a meeting that is being held in public, but it's not a public meeting. We do have questions from the public later on in the meeting, but we're not able to take live questions from you within this format. The meeting is being held virtually because of reasons of COVID-19 restrictions, as I'm sure everybody appreciates, and we continue within COVID-19 and nationally with rising infection rates, but with, of course, as you will hear later in this meeting, the very good news that a vaccination programme has begun in Cheshire, and that is absolutely great news. There is a but. The but is that whilst the vaccination programme has started, the vaccination programme has not finished, and we would still all on this governing body urge you to continue to follow all the restrictions that are in place, to use face coverings, to be socially spaced, to wash your hands, and to ventilate indoor spaces in order to prevent the spread of the virus. So please don't feel that because a vaccination programme has started, this is all over. It is a long way from being over, and we will urge that you continue to follow those restrictions. There are also things that I think in other communications we've asked of the public, and I'll just reiterate those. There are things that you, the people of Cheshire, can do to help us with this vaccination programme, and those are to not contact the NHS about the vaccination programme, whether it's your turn yet. We will contact you when it is time for your turn. When you do get that invitation, please act on the invitation, and when you get an appointment, please attend the appointment. And lastly, the bit that I said before, please continue to follow all of the restrictions which we know reduce the spread of this virus and we know will save lives. So please do that. It's very important. Thank you. That will take us then on to our substantive meeting, and we will start with apologies for absence. Christine, are there any apologies?
No, I haven't received any, Andrew.
Thank you very much. That takes us to declaration of interest, which is relevant to the agenda. And colleagues will also have noticed that attached to the meeting has actually been the declarations of interest, and I would ask people to update anything that needs to be updated on that. I've got a number of items on mine that needs to be updated, just the change of names of organisations more than anything else. So if anything that anybody wishes to add to that, please do so. And if there's anything relevant, declaration. Yeah, Leslie?
Great, yeah, sorry, it's Dr. Leslie Appleton. I'm one of the governing body GPs. I have a new declaration of interest. I've just been asked to be a representative for our PCN on Cheshire LMC.
Thank you very much, Leslie. We'll add that to your declarations of interest. I'm sure that colleagues, there probably are things that need to be updated, so please do update that. I noticed that something's falling off mine, which is my conflict of interest by my wife working at St Luke's, so I need to add that on and do some of the amendments, but I'm asking specifically now for amendments that relate to the agenda. So if there's anything that anybody's looked in that declaration and thinks there's something on here that is relevant to the agenda but I haven't declared or is wrong, can you just correct that now, please? No, okay, thank you very much. That takes us then on to the minutes, which on page 9 of your pack. Is there anything in those minutes? Well, let's go to Christine first. Christine, has anybody notified you of any corrections to the minutes prior to the meeting? I'll take that as a no. Is there anything that anybody else feels is inaccurate in the minutes or needs to be added to them rather than going through it page by page? No, I'm not seeing any hands up, so we'll take that as a acceptance that those are a true and accurate record of our last meeting. Thank you very much. There are some actions. If you'd like to go to the action log, which is on page 20 of your report, there are 2 ongoing actions. The first one is the ICP roadmap, which I think we just simply amended the date to put that forward into January, and I'm confident that's because of COVID pressures. Tracy, do you want to say anything about that action?
No, I'd agree with you that, and obviously we've work has continued, the discussions are continuing with our ICPs, and we also have some support from NHS England to help us with this agenda. But yeah, in light of COVID and winter pressures, that I think the ask is from all partners that we take a little bit more time before we bring this back to governing body. So we have it on the forward planner for January.
Lovely, thank you very much. The next three items are completed, and if colleagues are in agreement, we'll remove those from the action log. And then the last item 19 is the financial update. I can confirm that there is time in the diary for myself, Claire and Linda to discuss that. Linda, do you want to add any clarity to that in terms of when that can come back?
Okay, am I on mute? I think I am. So basically, we are waiting for further guidance for 21-22. We're also talking with the Healthcare Partnership around a financial framework, possibly for Cheshire and Mersey. So I think probably an update to the informal governing body, possibly in January, with where we're up to, with a bit more certainty, hopefully by February.
Okay, so back to formal for February. So we can move that action then to come back to us in February. Everybody's in agreement? Thank you very much, Linda. Right, that takes us to public questions and answers. We do have some questions, and they relate to the health inequalities paper, and I'll read them out now, but I'll suggest that we deal with them actually at the time of the health inequalities paper. So the questions are, and it's under agenda item 2.2, from Mr. Gus Cairns. What is the Cheshire Health and Wellbeing Board? Where do I find the papers and minutes, and where do I send questions to? I believe that there's been a response to Mr. Cairns about that, so that he can find that information. And then the other question is, will these groups be filled by internal people of the CCG, or will patients and public co-production be allowed and a chance to input to the West Cheshire Poverty Truth Advisory Board, West Cheshire Mental Health Partnership Board, and the two West and East Cheshire Autism Hub boards? And is there going to be a new strategy for handling health inequalities for CCG, and will it be co-produced with patients and public reps and groups representing deprived areas of Cheshire? So thank you, Mr. Cairns, for those questions. We'll address those when we come to that paper. I'll just make one comment on that, which is we're not proposing to recreate, as my understanding, we're not proposing to recreate a health inequality strategy. This is more of a consideration of the actions that the CCG needs to take in order to fulfil strategies and commitments that we've made with partners around health inequality. So colleagues can correct me if I'm wrong on that, but that is my understanding. But we'll come to that when we come to the health inequalities paper. Right, that takes us then to the Accountable Officers Report, which is on page 21 of your pack, colleagues. So Claire.
Thank you. So I'm going to start with an update on COVID, just a very brief couple of comments before I hand over to Tracy Cole, who's going to give us a sort of an assurance presentation. We have set up a COVID vaccination group, which reports into the COVID group at the CCG. You'll know that we're still in the middle of COVID. Our two local authorities are currently in Tier 2. I think today is the day, Ian and Matt, that we find out whether we move from Tier 2 to either Tier 3 or Tier 1. But I think at the moment we're middle of the pack, so we're probably going to stay where we are. But I think it's watch this space. Loads of work going on, fantastic partnership work across Cheshire and across Cheshire and Mersey to support the population. Vaccine programme, as Andrew said, has started with the Council of Chester last week and with three of our PCNs, I think, this week, but Tracy will update on that. So we have a COVID group that meets twice weekly, and Tracy oversees and is the SRO for the vaccination programme, and that group meets a number of times. So I'm going to hand over to Tracy to give us a bit of a presentation on sort of the work of the COVID group. This is about assurance to the governing body that we are fulfilling our statutory duties and requirements. The terms of reference of the COVID group are attached, and we're asking for the governing body to note the terms of reference and to support their inclusion in the CCG's corporate handbook. I'm going to hand over to Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire. So in front of you are some slides. They are slightly different to the ones that have been sent out. The reason for doing that is that things change very swiftly in the world of COVID vaccinations, and so I wanted to make sure you had something that was even more up to date than when the papers went out a week ago. So just to introduce myself, I'm Tracy Cole. I'm Director of Strategy and Partnerships, and as Claire said, I work within the COVID group, but then programme leading on this very specific piece of work around how we roll out the vaccination programme across Cheshire. So I have a very, very short slide deck to provide to you, which I hope will give assurance to governing body on two things. One, the governance of the programme, and two, the plans that are in place to make sure we meet our statutory responsibilities. So if we could move through, please, Noreen. So the slide you have in front of you is very busy, but it describes the governance that's in place across Cheshire and Merseyside, and that the programme has been cut into pillars. So this is how we are looking at it, and I'll take you through where we're up to on each of the pillars across Cheshire in a moment. The main focus for us is around pillar 3, around the community and the primary care, the PCN, the primary care network sites, and so I'll give you an update as to where we're up to on those in a moment. So the next slide then shows how we fit beneath that. So the blue box is the national group. And then you've got down the left is the purple boxes, which is the Cheshire Merseyside groups, and then Claire is leading the Cheshire, Warrington and Halton level, so that we are linking in with our wider partners such as police, fire and rescue, who operate on that footprint, and then we have a number of work streams that sit beneath that. So the next slide will just show you what they are. So you can see, starting with primary care and how we've grouped that work, and the next slide continues to give you a little bit more information on those work streams as well. If you would, Noreen. Thank you. So you can see the logos at the bottom of these slides, very deliberate. This is entirely about system, partnership, teamwork. I cannot begin to tell you the amount of effort and goodwill that I have seen across Cheshire and our two places to make this a reality. And that spans way beyond health and across a huge range of partners. And all I've seen is just an amazing can-do attitude, which you would expect. So ICPs are fully involved, both Cheshire West and Cheshire East Integrated Care Partnerships are doing a great piece of work in partnership with us to make sure that we mobilise and get this underway. The provider trusts and the local authorities also have a single point of contact within each, and it's very much about teamwork across the system. So if we keep moving through, please, Noreen. So this is nationally produced, the priority list as to who should be vaccinated and in what order. So that changed. So you'll see the little stars at the top. A lot of the information we get around the COVID vaccination programme changes very rapidly, and you have to keep an eye on the news, as we all do, as to what's happening with the COVID agenda. So recently, the latest guidance was changed, and that we were asked to focus on the two red groups, 1 and 2. So that's been our focus for this piece of work at the moment. That's what we've been asked to do, is make sure that we've got plans in place for all those who come under groups 1 and 2. The bits that are highlighted heavily in bold change from the last guidance. So on the 3rd of December, our planning and scenario planning needed to change to make sure that we adapted to cater for frontline healthcare and social care staff and their carers. So I just wanted you to be aware of that. The definition is very important as to how we then implement these plans. So let's have the next slide, please, Noreen. So going back to those pillars, pillar 1 is the acute, the NHS providers. So we have one provider in Cheshire, that's the Countess of Chester. That's not been decided by the CCG, that's been decided nationally where the hubs, the Pillar 1 sites will be, and therefore we're very delighted the Countess of Chester received vaccinations and was able to start vaccinating on the 8th of December. Some very emotional and very beautiful scenes, seeing a lady named Mona, who was the first person in Cheshire from Tarvin who received her vaccination on the 8th of December. I think that was a very important day for healthcare in Cheshire and across the nation. So great work, and we're linking in with the Pillar 1 work in the Countess of Chester. Pillar 2 is on the next slide, and that describes the work on the large scale sites. So we are linking in with Cheshire and Merseyside with their plans around sites in Manchester and St Helens to mobilise, and also then looking at the option to utilise pharmacy sites. There are 6 potential options that we've discussed, and we're working through with NHS England on pharmacies who may also vaccinate. What you will not see in these slides is details of the absolute locations of sites. I hope you can understand the reasons for that, which is until we're absolutely ready to know when those sites will mobilise, we don't want members of the public attempting to access those sites, because I think that will cause us an inability to meet demand. So it's very important that we communicate well with our population once we have firm messages to give. So I'm deliberately vague on those topics, on those details, and I think you'll understand the sensible reasons for that. Pillar 3 is on the next slide, and that describes the primary care network sites. So we have 18 primary care network sites which are planned to go live and mobilise over a number of phases. We were delighted, and you'll have seen much of national media coverage with the first site that came live was in Winsford on the 15th of December, and that, as you noted at the beginning, this information was correct as of yesterday, but things have moved on again since these were put together. So all of the vaccines that were delivered to Winsford have been delivered to the population in those priority groups. And then obviously Frodsham and Helsby have gone live, and we're also expecting Macclesfield to go live on the 18th of December. Amazing work from primary care networks and a range of people involved. I cannot underestimate or even begin to describe the amount of work that is required for a group of GP practices to come together to make this happen. So I can't even begin to explain that, but I think we need to praise and thank our colleagues in primary care for taking this on at a time when they're under great pressure due to the rest of the world as well. So I think we need to acknowledge that as a governing body and be very impressed with the way that people have handled that. If we can move to the next slide, please, Noreen. So this just gives you some information on the phasing. So again, I've not put too many details in there, but just to let you know that we are working on which wave will of when each site, those primary care network sites locally across Cheshire, will go live. The driving factor for that is availability of 1, the vaccination, and 2, other consumables that are required in order to do that well. So things like fridges and other things that are really important. It's not just any fridge, it's got to be very special environments. So we're working with the team at Cheshire Mersey and the national team to do everything we can to get those waves underway as fast as possible, but working through the needs of our population, and also working with the hub in the Council of Chester to make sure that we cover the population as fast as we can, but as safely as we can. Next slide, please, Noreen. And also we've been overwhelmed with people who are willing to return to work or to volunteer to support this programme. So rather than leaving each of our primary care networks to try and battle with a workforce problem, we've set up a central bank with the support of Mid Cheshire Hospitals Trust. And we've been delighted with the number of people who have expressed an interest, which you can see there. They're beginning to go through their training, and in due course, if each primary care network does require extra support to help them with this work over the coming weeks, then there is a bank of staff available to support that. But at the moment, most primary care networks have been using their existing staff, so the most experienced staff begin to administer the vaccines until we learn more about it, and that's the planned approach. Next slide, please, Noreen. There are risks with this. There are a great deal of issues around getting the equipment, staffing and the volunteers, and also people are learning about the vaccination. But we have put in place mitigations around some of the things that we found about the contraindications that you'll have seen in the news nationally. I'd like you to know that Dr. Andy McAlevey is leading on the clinical safety aspects of this programme and linking in with Andrea Lunt and others that are in from a pharmaceutical point of view as well. So I'm very confident that we've got the right clinical governance around this to make sure that all our patients are safe. Next slide, please, Noreen. This is the final slide. So there is an awful lot of detail we could go into, but I wanted to just give you a very quick overview, high-level summary, and ask you to understand the vast amount of work that's going in by a great deal of members of our staff and other staff around the system. Understand that we've got clear governance in place that fits back to the terms of reference that are in the Accountable Officer's report, and be assured that we have the plans in place that are necessary to deliver the vaccine to groups in 1 and 2, in the priority groups 1 and 2. Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks, Tracy. I think it's really interesting, as Tracy said, you know, that presentation was sort of up to date at the time of writing. Then overnight, there've been loads of emails about different waves of PCNs and bringing more hospital hubs on, community providers. So progress is being made literally every hour, every half hour. So I think a busy few days ahead of us to get next sites, both primary care and hospital, online in the new year. I think it's also interesting that, as I'm going to come on to the development of the integrated care system and the national document, in terms of the leadership and stewardship the CCG is taking at the moment on this programme. As Tracy said, I've got a role across the sub-region and also part of the Cheshire and Mersey Goal Command. So that's really about demonstrating CCG leadership and oversight of the system. So thank you, Tracy, and thank you to all the CCG staff, as well as primary care and partners. There's been a fantastic amount of work done across the whole organisation with this. So I just want to recognise the hours and commitments that have been put in over and above. So I'm just going to go on to item 3, which is around integrating care. So on the 26th of November, the National NHS England Improvement Board received a paper called Integrating Care. This is really about determining the future commissioning and system arrangements nationally, but obviously it has an impact for Cheshire and where Cheshire sits in Cheshire and Mersey. It's not just about commissioning, but apart from commissioning organisations are the ones that look as though they might be repurposed. There is conversations in the paper around provider collaboratives, around how we work with our local authorities, all of which are part of our agenda, our case for change, our way of working in Cheshire. But I think the key thing is about there are 2 options now going forward, and there's a consultation which ends at the 8th of January. And one of those options is around the ICS, which would be Cheshire and Mersey, being put on a statutory footprint and taking on the commissioning functions of CCGs from April 2022. So this is about repurposing the functions. The commissioning functions, both strategic and operational, will remain within Cheshire and will remain within Cheshire and Mersey, but may be delivered through different mechanisms and on different levels. This is a really important document. We need to think about it as a governing body and as an exec team and as part of a sub-region as well. And we have an opportunity to make our comments back to the national team early January. There's lots of other things going on in Cheshire and Mersey at the moment. So 3.10, I reference MOU, Memorandum of Understanding, which was highlighted in the HCP Partnership Assembly, sets out the principles and objectives of the partnership and how the partner organisations work with it. We're being asked to comment on it in advance of the partnership meeting in January. We will discuss it formally at the February governing body. At the same time, we're also in Cheshire and Mersey as part of this transition to an ICS, and HCP is looking for designation by April, looking at developing a joint commissioning committee. If you think about when we merged our 4 CCGs, in the advent of that, we had a joint commissioning committee for the 4 CCGs. So we have shared all the information in terms of reference, the process and how things worked into the Cheshire and Mersey system. So the accountable officers are developing a proposal around this and some draft terms of reference, which again will be coming back into the system in January. But it's something we need to consider as a governing body, and it's very much part of that transition. The burden of proof for Cheshire and Mersey is it stays in place unless it can be done better at scale. I think that's what we need to consider in all of these developments, both the integrating care document from National E&I, Memorandum of Understanding, and the proposals around a joint committee. There's a lot going on in Cheshire and Mersey, and we need to represent the population, we need to represent our organisation and our partners in those discussions. You can see item 4, the carer commitment. I'm not going to go through this because this has been discussed and debated at Strategic Commissioning and Partnership Committee in October, where we had a really helpful presentation. So I recommend this strategy to the governing body. We've received a letter from the Parliamentary Under Secretary of State for Children and Families, seeking assurance that the CCG, through myself and through Paula as the Executive Director leading on this, that we are basically fit for purpose around our children's safeguarding arrangements. I can assure you, and Paula can assure you, that we have clear lines of assurance and accountability. We work with our local authority partners and through statutory committees for this. It's not just the local authority, but this agenda covers police as well as, and so this is very much that wider agenda that we cover as a CCG. Paula takes the lead on this, and we can assure you that we are fit for purpose. We have all the mechanisms in place, but if we need to submit any forms, any reports to these Under Secretary of State, we'll do that with sort of pride in terms of the progress we've made and the work we're doing. You can see item 6, we are investing more money in mental health services appropriately. We have an additional 995 recurrent investment and a non-recurrent investment of 639,000 to support our agenda around improving the health and well-being for people with mental health problems. This is all age, so this covers both children's mental health and adults and older people. Something that we have set as a priority. Mental health is one of our priorities, and I think in terms of our wider agenda and the paper that Mike and I are going to talk to later in terms of inequalities, I think this is a really important proposal for the governing body to see. I think you'll see with the conversation that Tracy's talked about COVID and around mental health that inequalities have been exaggerated and really come to the fore in the COVID pandemic. So it's something that we need to support as a CCG. The exec team are reviewing the proposals around the governing body assurance framework tomorrow, and we'll propose some recommendations to come back to the governing body in January. At last meeting, I was asked to bring something around EU exit to the governing body because we're nearly there. Still don't know quite what the terms of that exit are going to be. I think that it's going to come right down to the wire, literally, on I think talks are going through right through to New Year's Eve. But we are working through a transition process. We have a group led by Phil Meakin, and we're working with our wider partners and the region on this. I'm attending and being part of a number of national webinars to make sure that we are doing everything we need to, and I can provide that assurance to you. Final page, on page item 10, we have recently received the predecessor CCG for so for 1920, we sort of playing catch up a bit with the national ratings on the CCGs. So we received a good for Eastern Cheshire, and the other 3 CCGs received requires improvement. Unfortunately, the financial position of a CCG trumps anything else we've done in terms of any sort of national formula or algorithm. So unfortunately, 3 of the CCGs received requires improvement, but really pleased to see Eastern Cheshire CCG received good. But I think importantly for all of us, and particularly for the exec team, that all of the 4 predecessor CCGs received good for quality of leadership. I'm really proud that we've achieved that. This is the 2nd year on the run that the CCGs have all received green for quality of leadership. So it's a massive thanks to everyone who was involved in the 4 CCGs in 1920 as part of the transition to receive those scores. So there are a number of recommendations there, Andrew, that you might want to just go through, and happy to answer any questions, and I'm sure my colleagues will help as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Claire. And there are some questions. Before we go to them, my apologies to colleagues, because I haven't got to my little chat box high enough and big enough, so I missed some of your comments. So we can just deal with some of those before we move on and take questions from Claire and then go to the recommendation. So there was a correction to the minutes from Matt, and we still have Matt down as interim, which is incorrect. So we need to correct that, please. The other thing is that we've often said we need to clone the executive team, but we do seem to have managed it today, and we have an alternative reality in which we have 3 Claire Watsons. So it might, for the 4 members of the public, I'm just going to ask the other 2 the 2 imposter Claire Watsons to introduce themselves so the public know who they are. So Mike, imposter, would you introduce yourself, please?
Hi. Yes, no, I'm not called Claire, not at the weekends either. So Mike Clark, GP in Macclesfield and Assistant Clinical Chair for CCG.
Thank you, Mike. And Fiona?
Hi, yes, Fiona McGregor-Smith. I'm a GP in Northwich. I'm a governing body GP.
Thank you very much. And then if we go to questions, Pam, you've got a question for Claire on her report.
Yeah, just about the membership of the COVID group. I just wonder whether it's worth having a lay member on that as well.
Yes, I mean, I think we're happy to lay members to be involved in this. And if you remember way back when, we did invite any governing body member to both review, attend meetings. I'm not sure if a lay member wants to attend at every single meeting, but I mean, I think very happy to sort of dip in and out as and when. They are very operational meetings. Oh, screen's changed. They are very operational meetings, but if that would provide greater assurance for the governing body, and also, I suppose, represent the patient in that. But we have that through, obviously, the wider partner organisations. But very happy, Pam, if anyone wants to sort of attend on an ad hoc basis.
It would be good then if you could somehow circulate the dates so that we could then decide maybe between us which one of us goes if we want to go. That'd be good. Thank you.
Okay, we can sort that out. Thank you.
Thank you. Brilliant. Are there any further questions for Claire on her report? Okay, Fiona.
Audio. Right, so there's 3 things. One was a comment, just for information really, and I don't think this is the CCG's gift. The obviously we don't have a number of vaccines yet allocated to the area that will cover the highest priority patients, and I don't think it's in the CCG gift, but people just need to be aware of that. So the first tranche, if you like, of the vaccines that are given, you know, I think GPs and presumably the hospitals are also having to make a decision. I suspect they'll start with the oldest patients and move downwards on the grounds that the age is just about the biggest overall factor of risk, but it's just that people need to be aware of that. So if they get queried about why you are already 85 and you haven't been called through, or 82, that might be the reason. The second one was well for Paula and Claire really, the safeguarding letter, was that a general letter to everybody, or was there a particular concern for? Oh, okay, that's just wondering whether there was a particular concern.
No, sorry if I didn't make that clear. This is a letter to all CCGs and all partners, statutory partners, around safeguarding for children. Right,
okay. And then the third one, which is there's the business about the widening Cheshire and Mersey, you know, potential strategic CCG, you know, getting a joint committee. I mean, we did that before and it takes quite a lot of time, and I suspect we'll be slicker, but also we're in the middle of a pandemic and winter pressures and everything else. I'm not sure that lots of people really understand that. So while I'm quite sure all the governance, etc., will be as it should be, I'm not sure that the communication or even the interest is there at the minute, because there's other things taking priority. So I would quite like to see a little bit more communication and explanation to, well, to the GPs to start with, but also probably the wider public. It may be everything is moving in that direction because that's how it's been mandated from the top, but we don't want to be in any way seen to be trying to not make that really obvious and really public. And I know we're talking about it here, but there's not thousands of people watching, I don't imagine. So I think that we probably just need to be absolutely crystal clear about that. That's it.
Yeah, okay, thank you. I'll answer that question first, Fiona, and then maybe Tracy, if you just want to say something just sort of about the cohorts and access to vaccine in our communications, because I think that's really important, as you say, Fiona. So we have, through our membership meetings and Senate meetings, we have informed our GP members around some of the HCP, Cheshire and Mersey plans. I mean, clearly the integrating care document is a national document and isn't something that the CCG has written, and so we have to work with it. We are inviting Alan Yates, and so the independent chair and the chief officer of the HCP, to the CCG's development session in December to sort of set the framework and the context when we discuss some of these documents and proposals in more detail. So we'll have an opportunity as a governing body to discuss this in more detail. I mean, the consultation runs from the 26th of November to the 8th of January. So it is an odd time to ask national consultation on a fundamental system organisational NHS change. That's what's been determined. There has been a lot of pushback from a number of organisations, and particularly locally, our local authorities, in terms of, you know, the timing of this in the middle of a pandemic, and why are we doing this in terms of fundamental system change when actually we should be prioritising, you know, the population, the COVID, we've got winter. So there has been some pushback, but we do need to communicate it, as you say. I mean, we'll be talking to our GPs in our January and February meetings to sort of share with them the proposals from the HCP and our response to that. In terms of the public, I suppose that's quite a tricky one, isn't it? Because this is a consultation with statutory organisations. The changes will then be sort of enacted. What we will try and do, as we did with the merger of the 4 CCGs, that the public in reality shouldn't see any impact, shouldn't see any change, because we have our primary care networks, we have our care communities, we have our integrated care partnerships, we work with our local authorities. In terms of service delivery and with our providers, we hope nothing will change because of this. It'll just be the oversight and the coordination, but we'd need to work with the HCP communications team, I think, and see what proposals they have for communications to the public. What we don't want to do is confuse the public in terms of changes, particularly at this time. So we'll have to work on that, Fiona. Thank you.
Can I just make a comment then? I think that's very fair. And as a user of services as well as a provider of services, as the user, I would completely agree with you. I don't almost worry about how it's all set up. What I do worry about is that the people I would then speak to know where to get the services from, and that's the bit I think might be that just might be missing. Surely, purely on the basis of there is so much else of such major importance going on. So that would be my comment.
Yeah, I mean, I think the consultation ends in January, and the direction of travel, if I'm honest, is for that statutory integrated ICS. And so, as I say, the functions for the CCG will be repurposed, but that oversight, that commissioning, that stewardship of the system, working with partners, will still remain. And obviously the relationship with the member practices won't change. It might be a slightly different way of working, but in terms of, you know, general practice and that continuity of care for patients, and primary care still working with a primary care team in Cheshire and or in place, that will remain. So that sort of key those key relationships stay regardless. Tracy, sorry, Andrew.
I was going to say, did you want to bring Tracy in? I thought you'd.
I was just going to say, Tracy, did you want to come in?
Yes,
Sorry.
yeah, I do, on the point that Fiona made around the COVID vaccination availability. So you're absolutely right, Fiona, really helpful to kind of question and make that comment. There is a limited amount of vaccine that's available, that's delivered in a, you know, there's a 975 doses are delivered in a certain package to each site. And then it's up to the site to administer those, as you say. So I could go into some quite complex detail around the order of how people are invited. But I think what's important to know is that each PCN is then making sure that they invite everybody in. They are seen within a short number of weeks, but they also have to then make sure that people can come back for a second vaccination. So as you well know, so I think it's really important that communication to the public is that is being handled well by each primary care network, and that each person will be invited. The delay between the start and the end is a matter of days and weeks rather than months and years. So people they can just be patient and wait, rather than, as Andrew said right at the beginning, contacting their practice. But yeah, it is about prioritising those most in need, and that's handled by the clinicians to make sure that they do that according to the requirements of the patients that they serve.
Thanks, Tracy.
Thank you very much. I think, Peter, you have a further question for Claire.
Yes, picking up from Pam's point, it's going back to the Recovery and Reset group. First of all, are we going to alter the terms of reference to include a lay member? Have we agreed to do that in what we just said? The second thing is circumscribing what Recovery and Reset actually covers. So I'm just thinking of an eventuality where we actually try and make a change to the way we commission within that group in order to achieve Recovery and Reset. And it's just because you'd expect, just like the rest of paragraph 2.5, if the decision is beyond the executive's powers, then it goes back to governing body anyway. But if it represents something which is strategic in terms of commissioning and a change to what we've done in the past, then it should be going back through the strategic commissioning committee. But I'm just wondering I don't think that's currently reflected in the definitions of that of the terms of reference. And finally, and this will come up a little bit later when Matthew does his section on the governance review. I would prefer to be approving the terms of reference and approving their inclusion in the CCG's corporate governance handbook. So I think this is something we should be approving, not agreeing to and noting.
So on the last point, I agree. I think we've probably used the wrong. Sorry, my screen keeps moving. So yes, no, I agree, Peter. It should be approving, because these are terms of reference that we want as part of the CCG sort of, it's part of our corporate business, isn't it? So I agree with that. Obviously, we can change the terms of reference to include a lay member if that is the recommendation and decision of the governing body. That's an easy one to make. Obviously, we're not presenting those. That's what we'll have to make that amendment. So that is absolutely fine. I'm not 100% sure I understand what you mean about the other bit, Peter. So within my sort of within the SFIs and my allowance, my ability to sort of make decisions in terms of the funding, and with the execs, we do make some decisions around funding, partly because we need to make immediate decisions. But when it's outside the SFIs, we do these urgent decisions, and we've had a number of those over the past 2 or 3 months. So I think the terms of reference covers that. If you don't feel it does, we'll need to review those.
If I can,
what you're asking, Peter, I'm not sure what you.
Not quite. Sorry, I did a Robert Peston and bundled about 4 questions into one there, didn't I? But I think it's more the nature of the commissioning rather than the cost or the provider. So that if we're making an irreversible decision to do something differently, as in pursuit of recovery and reset.
Yeah, I mean, I think the decisions we're making around sort of COVID investment are short term. We would then, I mean, all the investment is non-recurrent because most of it we are pulling down from a national sort of funding source, which sort of runs out at the end of March. So the decisions are short-term sort of capacity issue decisions to support the system to cope with the COVID pandemic, be it discharge, be it the bereavement service, be it the COVID positive beds, virtual ward. These are short-term sort of service developments to support the flow of business and to support to get the system to support, patient care in the pandemic. I think the challenge will be, and all of those schemes have exit strategies. We've been very clear there are exit plans so that there's an ending by the end of March. So in terms of some of the beds, patients, there'll be no admissions into the beds after February because of the length of the sort of the journey the patient takes. So I think the decisions in the terms of reference are short-term COVID related decisions. So I'm comfortable with that. If that answers your question, otherwise we can have another look, Peter. But I think the fact we have the urgent decisions, and I know that Linda and Alex take the decisions around COVID spend through the Finance Committee. I think we have that assurance as well. So I hope that provides the governing body with enough sort of assurance that we are sort of following all of our
Can I bring Peter back in? Peter, does that answer your question? Or is there anything specific we need to do about changing this item?
I'm really assured by what Claire's saying, and I'm also assured by the fact that if we've got lay member representation in there, we've got an additional check or that things are going as they should within that committee. So that would answer my question, and I would be happy, Andrew.
And other colleagues.
Okay, so I think I gave a Robert Peston answer to a Robert Peston question, didn't I? But I think we got there in the end.
We did. Thank you.
Lovely. Thank you, colleagues. We are over time by 10 minutes on this item. We've got Mike to come in for a question. So can you be brief, please, Mike?
Absolutely, and it's just going back to vaccines very quickly in that, again, I just wanted to clarify and then just confirm with Tracy as well and colleagues, vaccine stability is an issue. So actually, even though care homes are a priority, we have, unlike Scotland, still had to go down the route of not going out to care homes because of transporting vaccines. So I just want to clarify that's still the situation. Nobody is unfortunately able to go out to vaccinating care homes at the moment, but obviously they still remain a priority when we can get out there.
Would you like me to answer that, Chair? Yeah, yes, you're absolutely right. So there's an awful lot a detail that I didn't put in the presentation to keep it short and sharp. You will know, Mike, we're hopeful of the other vaccination becoming approved in the next few days. So if that does become approved, I say in the next few days or week or so, that's what we're being hoped for. That will then change the scenarios that we can plan for. So yeah, we are being asked to work up a few pilot areas where they can put in place a roving model, but nowhere yet has that model in place because of the vaccine stability. But that will happen, and it will happen soon, and it will be, we'll be asking PCNs to work through how they want to do that. We have had some Cheshire PCNs who said they'd be willing to be part of that pilot to work out what that means and what's required. But you're right, we're not behind the curve with that, Mike, at all, and it's driven by vaccine stability.
Lovely. Thank you very much, colleagues. There are no further questions, I don't believe, in the chat bar, so I'll lead us then to the recommendations, and we are being asked to note, although I think we're changing that, I think quite appropriately, to approve the terms of reference for the COVID-19 recovery group, and to agree to the inclusion of that into the CCG's corporate governance handbook. We're being asked to endorse the draft all-age Cheshire West and Chester carers strategy and support the publication of that carers strategy. Are we all in agreement with that?
So Andrew, that would be the terms of reference with the addition of the lay member.
Yes, sorry, I should have said with the addition of a lay member. Although there is talk in the chat box, I think, which is valid in terms of ensuring that our governance structure doesn't get our assurance structure doesn't get too close to operations, which I think is very valid.
I think that was the point I was making about ad hoc as opposed to a substantive member, but I don't mind.
We need to be very careful about the role of that person attending that meeting, don't we? And if we get that right, then that won't be a problem. Lovely, thank you very much. So we'll take those as agreed, and we'll move forward to item 4.1, which is on page 54 of your pack and is our health inequalities paper, a very important and central stream to our strategy. And I think Dr. Michael Clark is introducing this for us.
Thanks, Chair. So yes, name has changed on screen now to identify me correctly. So hopefully, again, as you mentioned earlier, Andy, we'll hopefully try and address Gus's questions throughout the presentation and questions afterwards. But firstly, thanks to Andy, Ria and Matthew for essentially bringing the majority of this paper together with some contributions from Claire and myself, but also to acknowledge the significant expertise of two other governing body members, of Ian and Matt as Directors of Public Health. I'm not an expert in health inequalities. They are much more experts, and it's their bread and butter compared to us. But just trying to address what is our requirement as a CCG. So hoping really to just bring the governing body up to speed about the work that's already been done in relation to health inequalities, to understand the scope of data we could look at, whoever that is looking at the data, and also trying to understand to some extent our commitments and responsibilities. But first of all, just sort of going through some definitions as in the paper as well. The WHO defines health inequalities as difference in health status or in the distribution of health determinants between different populations. Some of the definitions do add in comments of unjust elements and avoidable elements to those health status as well, but also some acknowledgement sometimes that this is behaviours and individual choices that influence those health inequalities as well. And again, just trying to further define those health determinants. Figure 1 in the paper on page 56 sort of does then go and sort of give an overview of what social determinants of health are. I won't go through it all, but yeah, interplays with many aspects of daily life and how they would influence on a wide range of health issues, on functioning, on quality of life, and people's risks there in life. Moving on to figure 2, it's quite sobering to see that how little health actually, or clinical care actually, contributes to somebody's health outcomes, and that sort of gives a stark reminder of all the other determinants that influence somebody's health there. So again, just wanted to highlight that. Again, the paper does also go on to highlight some of our legal duties as a CCG within the Health and Social Care Act, that we should properly and seriously consider the need to reduce health inequalities and to try and improve health outcomes. And obviously, we'll all be aware of the Marmot review, and I believe this last year was the 10-year re-review of Marmot as well, just trying to raise the profile of the wider determinants of health. What are we expecting to do as a CCG? What is the local picture? So we do need to have overarching CCG insights into what health inequalities are, what our health inequalities are as well in our patch. It needs to align with the CCG's strategic objections, particularly highlighting to improving the wellness of our communities and also equity and equality in healthcare. And then how that leads into our commissioning intentions and any policies we produce need to reflect our commitment to addressing those health inequalities. Very importantly, we already have 2 place-based plans co-produced across the local authorities, CCGs and other partners as well. So again, they're referenced in the paper. I would advise everybody to familiarise themselves with those 2 plans if they haven't done already, so we know where we are heading and have agreed to head strategically with our 2 place-based partners. And again, just reminds that the place there is co-terminus of local authorities and our ICPs, but as well as an overarching Cheshire CCG strategy and those 2 place-based strategies, it's about what level of data and flexibility we allow or agree to devolve down to individual care communities within the ICPs, and obviously they're in general co-terminus with our PCNs as well. So how much data the PCNs care communities need in order to flex their overview and commitments to addressing health inequalities. So figures 3 and 4 in the paper also just give a bit more information of a CCG overview as well. And then the rest of the appendices in the paper really are just giving us a bit of an idea of the data that's available. The expectation isn't that we absorb all of that data and fully understand it here, but just to understand there is a plethora of data, both through the local authorities and data that's available through the CCGs for us to review and determine. One area to pick out particularly is in trying to improve health outcomes and health inequalities. There is a significant range and discrepancy in not just life expectancy, but disability-free life expectancy. And what is quite evident globally, nationally, regionally, is that there tends to be a bigger gap between disability-free life expectancy and life expectancy in the more deprived areas. So people in more deprived areas, although they live for a shorter time, they live a longer time with disability. So therefore their health needs, social needs will be greater as a consequence as well. So what are we asking of the CCG? It's more be aware of the data, be aware of our responsibilities, our commitments. And it's not about creating a new strategy, either place or as a CCG in general, but it is about us being able to have a mechanism for implementing those strategies and our commitments, but also to better understand the data so that we can have that Cheshire overview and have flexibility for that data to be reviewed at care community level and for the care communities to then be able to have an influence directly on those health inequalities. So it's an opportunity to discuss the data as much as needed, but more the principle of the fact that we've got lots of data to look at. It's also about how the CCG governing body then receives that data as to whether we have that paper come back to the CCG and in what level of detail, and whether we have a working group to review the data and to assure ourselves that we're aligned to our commissioning intentions and our strategic objectives in relation to health inequalities. And the other option is that we, rather than bring that to a working group, we actually make that part of the Strategic Commissioning and Performance Committee. So the asks there of the CCG is into what format we review our commitments and our work for health inequalities, and how we want that to be brought back to the governing body. So I'll be quiet there now. I don't know if Claire, you want to come in with anything else?
Thank you.
Briefly, we'll need to be brief though, I'm afraid, because of our time constraints.
Oh, right, okay. Thanks, Mike. I think this is really important piece of work, and I think we've talked a long time, haven't we, as a CCG, about wider determinants, population health management approach to commissioning, working in partnership. And I guess this is about, for me, it's about time we put our money where our mouth is, really, and look at doing this jointly with our local authorities. Investing in the wider determinants is absolutely fundamental, as Mike said, in terms of our strategic objectives around equity and equality in health and care and improved wellness in the community. Look at the bullet points underneath those. Absolutely, this is what this agenda is all about. So I think our commissioning and contracting intentions need to really push this agenda forward. We need to see how we can, through our integrated commissioning and our integrated investment, spend more on the wider determinants on early intervention and prevention, which is that population health and inequalities agenda. I think that's key to what we do as a CCG, as part of leaders and stewards of the system. I think this needs to be referenced in our GBAF, bring it to front and centre to the importance of the CCG and the governing body. I think that the 8 impact areas are really important for us to look at, not just sort of because some of the timelines have gone, because this is around the phase 3 planning. The phase 4 planning will be upon us. I think it's not going to be Christmas Eve this year, it's going to be early January, but that will identify some responsibilities for commissioners and for health providers and health commissioners working in partnership with our local authorities. So I think this is a fantastic opportunity to put this agenda front and centre, and I think having Matt and Ian, clearly this is not about duplicating what they do, because they are the absolute leaders of this agenda across the 2 places. It's absolutely pulling together the CCG's responsibilities. So I think it's very timely, and okay, Andrew, I'm going to stop. I think it's timely, and I'd really support and recommend this to the governing body. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I'm going to take it that unless colleagues wish to disagree, that we all think this is an important agenda, wish to see improvement upon this agenda, and I'd like our discussion to focus, if you would please, on action on this. I was very taken with an officer of the CCG who said, yeah, we've got a strategy. It's not very different from the strategy I remember being involved in writing 10 years ago. And so I'd like us to focus our discussion, if we would, on actions, how we take this forward as a CCG, as a good partner, but also internally in the CCG in our responsibilities around this. I've got 3 people who wish to comment. So can I bring in, it's going too quick for me now. Peter, did you have a comment on this one?
Yes, very quickly. If we put this within a committee, we need to approve the proposal, so I'll go back to the wording of that. But I think we need to be thinking ahead a little bit with whether, if it becomes the remit of the Strategic Commissioning and Performance Committee, whether this is attaching itself to the commissioning bit or the performance bit. Because otherwise, thinking about the agenda a little bit further down the agenda, we then have an issue about which half of that committee it's gone with. See what I mean?
Absolutely. And one of the things I was going to say, Peter, was I see this, and we have talked before about, there are some papers that come to us, there's some proposals that come to us that bubble up through the organisation as assurance pieces, and there are some which we need to take on as leadership pieces. My suggestion to colleagues is a leadership piece, and this is how we lead on this item, in which case I would say that it sat with the strategic bit of that committee, would be my suggestion. Was that the end of your point, Peter? Yeah. So I'm probably picking people out of order, so my apologies, but I know Ian, you wanted to come in.
That's all right. Thank you, Chair. If I can just thank Michael and the colleagues for pulling the paper together. It's been a very challenging year for myself and Matt, Tyra, and I think Matt will come in a moment, but I think we both really welcome the discussion. And thank you very much for pulling it together. I think there is a little bit wider work we need to do with regards to response to the questions that came in from the public and anyone watching at home. We went through incredible efforts to develop our place plans, co-produced with members of and residents. It was the biggest conversation we had in Cheshire West through an appreciative inquiry approach that features within the place plan and is owned jointly by the CCG and the council, and is actually the Joint Health and Wellbeing Board strategy. So with regards to when asked, do we need another strategy? Definitely not. We've got to really firm it, but what we do need to do is revise it, which we have been doing, and just to make the governing body aware, our teams have been working with CCG officers on revising the place plans and taking on board the challenges that we've actually seen from the COVID response, thinking about how actually, the mental health challenges are coming through, thinking about the social isolation challenges that are coming through. And I think looking ahead, I think figure 2, as Michael highlighted, the impact of those wider determinants on health outcomes are significant. And unfortunately, we're going to face a massive challenge for our economy and working skills over the next, for the next 12 months. So absolutely welcome it. I think there's a opportunity for us to do a session with the governing body later on in the year, which we will do. I expect the revision to the place plan to be available for Cheshire West at least in January time for us to chair and take through the Health and Wellbeing Board. Fantastic stuff, bringing it through together. Challenges for us all, but it's great doing it together, so thank you.
Thank you very much for that comment, Ian. And my apologies, Paula, you asked to speak earlier, and the chat bar went too far forward. So Paula, and then I'm going to bring in Matt after that, please.
Thanks, Andrew. I guess I just want to pick up on the point you made about linking to actions and our next steps. And I welcome Ian's point about, more work to be done in terms of being as focused as possible so that we can move towards delivery aspect of the strategy. But I took part in some safeguarding training last month, and it was hosted by West Cheshire Poverty Truth Commission. And the training was set around a film that was based on a script written by a group of very talented young people. And it gave a remarkable insight into how a young person living in poverty led very rapidly into a situation where they were sexually exploited. And I think, it's really important that we have the widest lens possible when we're starting to think about health inequalities. And it wasn't really a point for people to answer today, but I guess it was about trying to draw some lines and join some dots up really about some specific actions that we could focus about understanding the widest possible lens on health inequalities. And I think it links probably to some of the impact that we felt in the economy over the last 9 months. The link was quite, it was really difficult to watch actually, and to really understand how quickly some challenges around poverty led to a very challenging situation for a young person. And it was rooted in fact. It was not a made-up scenario. I think it's just important to take this back to reality as well. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Paula. Absolutely, would agree. And Matt, could you come in, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Really delighted to read the paper and the focus on inequalities, and I'm delighted to hear the focus from Claire on putting our money where our mouth is, but and as well the thread of getting some of those marmot principles through it that immediately listening to the story that Paula was telling brings in some of the best start in life stuff that is that the marmot review is steeped in. I think from our perspective, and to avoid any repetition of anything that Ian has already said, I'm delighted to tie this to the Inequalities Commission that we're just starting on within Cheshire East Council, but also as we develop that in terms of data and information provision, and particularly intelligence provision to our care communities, I'm keen that we're developing a place-based approach to our joint strategic needs assessment. Obviously, we've got our tartan rug refresh, which is coming, but that's how we're hoping to underpin that and provide information for action. Because we talked a lot about data and how we need to do that, but I was struck by Dr. Wilson's comment about the fact that we run the risk of strategies just being a rehash every 10 years, because these the inequalities are so deep seated within the communities that yes, there might be nuance to the changes within them, but actually the root causes, the long-term drivers have remained the same for extended periods of time. So I'm obviously want everything to be intelligence led, because that's how we do public health, but it needs to really drive that action. So pulling that all together with putting our money where our mouth is, using the data to really drive genuine action and change. And I look forward to working with you all on it.
Lovely, thank you very much, Matt. We do need to move very swiftly to our recommendations, because I think there are points of discussion within there and decisions to be made. I've got Fiona, Claire, and Suzanne still to comment. Could I ask if in your comments, perhaps you might want to address the discussion that we need to have about how the best way to take this forward is, which is part of our recommendation. So Fiona, I think.
So thank you, Chair. So it was exactly that the point I wanted to make, and I don't know the answer here, so I'm looking for a bit of guidance around the 4.3 question, which is essentially, do we have an internal group or is this strategic? Because I can't remember in the dim and distant past how it happened that public health very much got tied in with local authorities. I still don't think that as a user of a service and as a member of public that people necessarily understand that. So we do talk about money where your mouth is, but it's very stark when you look at figure 2, that was page 57, how little the actual care delivery to an individual makes. But if I'm that individual, I still want the care. So that I can't quite work out whether it's better for us to try and really be as supportive as we can while we do what the CCG is required to do statutorily. That's the bit I can't quite get, bearing in mind the comment that Claire made right at the beginning, that financially we hadn't hit that target, and so we were still required improvement. And there is a problem with the flow of money, surely, in getting things that as a GP I know were essential, you know, sort of very early days learning, and, you know, making sure people have information about not smoking, not drinking too much, you know, decent diet. All of those things make so much more difference unless you're the individual who needs the open heart surgery, you know, and I don't quite know how we square that. So I'm looking for guidance from the rest of you on that, please.
Okay, thank you. I mean, there is before we move on to the next folks, I think you said our internal focus. There are things I think as a CCG we could and should be thinking about, things which we perhaps haven't tackled. Are we as a governing body confident that our investment within primary care reflects the needs of the population? Because I would suggest there probably is an inverse investment in primary care dependent upon the needs of the population. Are we confident that our commissioning money is spent to reduce health inequalities in every way that it can be, or actually is there an inverse care law operating within Cheshire? And there almost certainly is in the money that we spend. So I think there are things that we can specifically pick up and be considering separate to the bigger issues we need to work with partners on in terms of wider health determinants, etc. So Claire, you wanted to come in.
It was actually I've said what I wanted to say in after Mike. I know I can see Ian's got his hand up. I guess just
Ian. Yeah. Lovely. Ian.
Okay.
Is that okay? Sorry, it's just I think it's really pertinent to come back on that point. So thank you, Fiona. So for me, we're going to get stuck in the trap previously if we go down that road, aren't we? So the NHS long-term plan is meant to have prevention at the heart of it, and as the CCG, you're going to reduce the demands at your services by investing in that prevention in the community. We all know that. So being focused on the money and what's just in your statutory gift isn't going to get anybody out of the system. You need to be bold, you need to be brave and do what's right for the residents. And that involves maybe targeting things in areas of greatest need, and maybe targeting things that aren't necessarily the medicalisation and the clinical need to be delivered. Because as you said, you know, all the things that we try to prevent, smoking and high blood pressure ends up at your daughter. So I think we need to challenge some of that and not just focus on the statutory needs. There's quite clearly a framework from the NHS long-term plan around prevention and yeah, you mean this is the start of looking at those inequalities and what does that biggest impact have? If the CCG just look at the investment that's required for the health services, then that will just remain in that way, and you'll still see people going to hospital. It'll still cost the CCG more. You'll still have pressures going into the GP services. You'll never turn the tide.
Ewan? Suzanne, did you want to come in? And that, I think, will be our...
Thanks, Andy. Yeah, it's interesting. It felt a bit like a bit of a data download when I saw this agenda item. I was a bit unsure why we just had all this plethora of links. When you go into them, they're quite high level. They're a general policy. And yet within the body of the paper, there was some really good data about areas where we do have deprivation. So my question and challenge, having sat on the CCG for 8 years, what difference have we made to health inequalities? Because COVID has highlighted they are there and they are greater than perhaps some of us perceive. So I think it's not created them, it's just highlighted them. So I would challenge ourselves as CCG, as public health, what difference have we made with our existing strategies? We don't need a new one, but are the current ones working? Where can you tell me we've invested more money in Winsford to address this? What have we done to make a difference, not just as a health sector, but collectively with our partners to really improve the life of those? And I think Andy sort of touched on my thoughts when the conversation I had with another meeting last week about this was, are we actually directing money in primary care to tackle some of those issues working with our partners? Because we talk a lot in the past about making sure primary care, everyone has their fair share, but actually, has that been the right way to address health inequalities in some of the areas where actually perhaps we need to invest more rather than just a fair share? So it feels like a bit congratulatory in this conversation, and I don't actually feel that position at all. I think we've got an awful lot of work to do together. The question we're actually being asked about the focus group was a bit vague, but I think for me, I would pick up and say it should be strategic. It should be commissioning work that specifically addresses some of those areas identified where we're clearly not getting people out of deprivation for whatever reason. And we look to public health, and I can remember conversations where smoking cessation funds have been massively slashed, and our GPs challenging how they were going to deliver that support service. So I think we need to have a really closer examination of what we've done and where we're going with this, but regardless of our strategy and policies in place. Thanks.
So, Andrew, can I just come in? I think that's what we're proposing we do.
We are very close to time.
Okay, I think that's what we're proposing to do. I don't think this is self-congratulatory, Suzanne, probably quite the opposite. The links are in because there is so much context, so much information. This is not about replicating, as we've said, it's not about creating something new. It's about challenging ourselves. And I think that's what the conversation has been. I mean, we have, as an organisation, over the number of years, signed off financial plans which have not invested in public health, in wider determinants, in early intervention and prevention. We have done that. So that is collectively, that's gone through finance committee, gone through governing body. So we all need to own the challenge we've got. So I think it is strategic. We work with our local authorities, we work with our population, and we make a difference. That's our challenge. We have
Can I just say, I'm challenging myself.
We're going to need to move on. Sorry, Suzanne, we are going to need to focus on what it is that we're being asked and the next steps, which are to receive a education session, a development session for the governing body, which I think we can then discuss these things in greater depth and make sure we have understanding, and on how we're going to take forward this as an action. And I think there's two suggestions there: a working group, or it's picked up by the strategic commissioning group, or it can be a combination of those two things. So those are things that we will be asked. I've not got a feeling, nobody has commented particularly, I don't think, on their views on how they should be picked up. So I'm going to pause slightly in case somebody's got some specific focus on that item. Mike?
My only comment would be that if we do have an education session for the governing body, then I think there's less emphasis on us having a working group, and it could then be managed in strategic commissioning and performance. really it's the decision, do we have a working group that then brings something back through to the governing body, or do we have a development session as a CCG, and then potentially the commissioning element of a strategic commissioning and performance committee might be the best place then to just bring that together in order to come back to the governing body. Personal view, but
I would agree with that view, Mike. And if a working group is needed, then strategic commissioning could form a working group if they felt that needs to be done outside of that committee. So is anybody in disagreement with that point? And we want to comment differently on that? No, thank you. Okay, so if you go to the recommendations on page 54, we're being asked to receive a further update paper. I'd like to alter that prop slightly and saying if we're going to ask the strategic commissioning committee to oversee this, I'd ask one of the things that they might do is define what we mean by update, because I think we've talked about action. I think we've talked about wanting to see some probably plans rather than a further update. So perhaps the strategic commissioning committee can work on picking that up and defining what update means and making it more action focused. We've been asked to agree that we receive a development session, which I think the enthusiasm shown about discussing this item shows that it would be good to discuss this further. So I think we're in agreement to that. Nobody's nodding, so I'll say yes to that. And then we're asked to agree the mechanism, which I think we just had a discussion and suggesting it should go to the strategic commissioning committee. The other thing that I think we have discussed and I think would be good for the strategic commissioning committee to reflect on, and I realise this is in parallel with the GBAF coming back to us in January, is having a focus on what the GBAF monitoring should be on this item, and perhaps giving a view on that GBAF item that it is appropriate for us to be able to keep at the appropriate level of scrutiny on that item. Is that acceptable to everybody? Yeah. Mike?
Our comment's very quick one on timescales. So if we are going to have a development session and go to strategic commissioning performance, is March too early to come back to governing body, or do we feel that's still acceptable?
If it would be acceptable, shall we say it would be March or April, and we'll leave that to the strategic commissioning committee to decide to manage that and decide when it's best to come back to, if that's acceptable to everybody.
Fine. Thank you.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you. That takes us to item 5.1, which is the committee governance terms of reference. Matthew, please.
Thank you, Andy. So on page 73 of your pack up to 92 is the more in-depth report, which I'm not going to go through in chapter and verse, because obviously you've had a chance to read that. So what we've pulled out in terms of this presentation is the key recommendations that we need to go through today, or the improvements that we've done so far. So Noreen, if you could just move to slide 2, please, if that's okay. So again, just a bit of a reminder, previously, you gave approval for a terms of reference review for the committees and governance and audit committee to have oversight of that sort of process and to receive recommendations that came out of workshops that you all kindly attended, and any focused discussions that we've had with you around the operation and the performance of our committees, of the governing body and the CCG. We took the consolidated recommendations back to the Governance and Audit Committee on the 25th of November. It was a similar paper to what you've received in the pack today, and we've updated it since then. What we took to was a proposal around sort of a 3-phased approach to the implementation of either the improvements or the recommendations that have come out of this piece of work. And you'll hopefully have seen in the main paper that phase 1 really is the bits that we can just change really easily in terms of formatting and style, and some minor revisions, corporate governance manual. Phase 2 and phase 3 were more significant changes that we need your consideration and approval for, and some of them might have some consequential impacts on things like changes to the constitution and further engagement with the membership. So just put that into consideration when I go through the recommendations. Noreen, if you could move on, please, that'd be great. Okay, so probably, unfortunately, there were 13 improvements. We should have added a fourth or taken one off just to make it bit more palatable. But a number of improvements were identified through this work. So 5 we've done, improvements have been completed, and you've seen that in your main paper. There are 5 that we're bringing as recommendations for either approval or rejection today, and then there are 3 that have a series of options that I'll try and get to quickly, because they're the one that I'm sure you'll probably have some thoughts about. Just picking up on some of the conversations that we've had today, some of these recommendations do need to be considered in the light of the wider developments in Cheshire and Merseyside, and our capacity to deliver some of them also during the vaccination effort, but also just from a constitutional point of view, there are things that might be coming through from Cheshire and Merseyside that require us to change our constitution that impact potentially on some of the recommendations here as well. If you can move on, please, Noreen. I did promise Andy I'll try and move quickly through. Next one, please, Noreen. Okay, so I've tried to highlight, oh, go back, there we go. So I've tried to highlight on the presentation where you are in the pack as well in terms of the recommendations. So in terms of the first one, in terms of number 6 on page 81, there was a recommendation that came from the recent MIAA review of our committees, one around adding some specific wording about the ability to hold electronic meetings. We already have that sort of wording in our standing orders of our constitution, which I believe covers the recommendation and the spirit of the recommendation. We can, of course, add in the wording to all our terms of reference, but I'll go back to my earlier point that will probably require some constitutional changes because of a number of the terms of reference are based within our constitution. Like I said, our standing orders does allow us to hold virtual meetings as we are doing today. There are recommendation number 7 on page 82 and number 8 on page 82. One is around once we've agreed in effect the CCG budget or strategic plans, then our annual work plans for our committees are shaped around that for 21-22. There was one around the primary care commissioning terms of reference for that to remain unchanged at this moment in time. And you know, we're going to review things around the financial plan and primary care budget, and obviously the considerations around delegation of elements to the ICPs. Again, the primary care terms of reference is one that has to be in our constitution. So if we do change it, then we do need to go through the process of approval from NHS England, and I would imagine our membership first. Andy, do you want to go through yes, no now, or do you want to wait to the end?
I think you probably best take it as chunks, otherwise it's going to be very complicated doing it as a whole thing. So I go through as in chunks, Matthew. Okay, so I'm going to open up because I think there are questions in the chat bar. Andy, I don't know if you want. Okay, so do you agree to the recommendations in number 6, number 7, and number 8? So I think Peter wants to make some general comments. We'll let Peter make his general comments, and then we'll come to the yes or no on those 3. So Peter.
Yeah, I'd written a short speech because I was on there as a speaker.
Sorry, Peter. I'll try to be quick.
I just wanted to say that before we get into discussion, this has come back to the governing body much quicker than I thought it possible. So I just wanted to say well done, Matthew, and Dylan. I think is on the call, so listening. So well done, Dylan. I only wanted to say there's been lots of involvement from governing body members already. So some of these things will have been discussed all the way through. Lots of progress to date, quite clearly. We've broken our rules, I think, by boiling it all down into a PowerPoint presentation. I think it probably makes it more palatable and easier to decide off. And also, these are not GARC recommendations. GARC has merely overseen the work. So I know I just wanted to get those things out of the way, because to say it at the end after the discussions would be extraneous. So just a few words, but certainly, well done the team, I think, on this one.
Thank you for that, Peter. So Matthew, do you want to then, with those things in mind, take us through the recommendations and see if we can get some yeses or nos on them?
Yeah, so thank you, Peter, for raising those points. I would have got to them in the end. I was just trying to move us on. So in terms of recommendation number 6, in terms of the inclusion of specific wording in each terms of reference around holding our meetings virtually or electronically, the ask is not to include it, because I believe our standing orders covers that. Does the governing body agree? Or does the governing body wish to take MIA's recommendation and put them all into our terms of reference? I think governing body, are you get a nod of heads to include?
I think you're probably going to be better to ask, take 1 point and ask for the people who agree with it and ask for dissenters. Yeah. Otherwise.
Okay, do you agree with the recommendation number 6?
Yes.
I'm seeing lots of heads shaking, yeah. Okay, Andrew, I'll go on to number 7. Does agree with recommendation number 7 around development of the annual work plans developed for the committees in 21-22? Linda and Chris and Christine all putting their hands up there, Andy. I don't know if you can see them.
Yeah, I can see people. That was a majority.
Oh, okay. Do you want me to, Christine, go first? I think you were the quickest. Was that approving, was it? Or right, okay. It's holding up for questions. I think everyone approved that. Okay, in terms of recommendation number 8, keep the primary care committee terms of reference the same, no changes for this moment in time. Does the governing body agree? Hands are up saying yes. Now I now know the form. Okay, can we move on to the next slide, please? I'm used to Teams where everyone puts their hands up, ask questions. Sorry. Okay, so this one in terms of approval or rejection was around estates and procurement issues, and again, some of the feedback that we got through this process in terms of there wasn't necessarily a committee that had estates within its terms of reference. The recommendations here is that the estates budgets are to be managed by the appropriate committees and as in line with the work plan, as in line with the scheme of reservation and delegation of the members on those committees. Does the governing body agree with that recommendation, which is number 9? Thank you very much. Okay, again, in terms of the other recommendations around putting services to tender and the awarding of contracts.
Can I stop you?
Similar recommendation.
Suzanne's got a query on number 9, which is the last. So before we approve that.
Oh, right, sorry, it's on the point 4 of number 9, so I was just
okay. My apologies.
That, yeah.
So Suzanne's got.
Okay, I'll get to that then. Okay. Okay, again, so recommendation around decisions on putting services to tender and the awarding of contracts, again, managed by the appropriate committees, governing body, and in line with our scheme of reservation and delegation. Does the governing body agree with that? I believe most people are there, yes. And then in terms of the register of procurement decisions, the recommendation is that the finance committee maintain oversight of that register in terms of its content being appropriate and kept up to date, and as per its role, the Governance and Audit Committee review the procurement register on a regular basis in line with its oversight managing conflicts of interest. Does the governing body agree? But no, Suzanne, that's the point you want to raise.
Yeah, can I just come in on that last one? Thanks, Matthew. I understand the role of the Finance Committee. The GARC I find a bit odd. You're retrospectively looking at whether something has been compliant with conflicts of interest. I wasn't sure of the value of that. To me, when in the procurement process, there's a point where they need to make sure any conflicts of interest are recognised either internally or externally as well. And to me, that at that point, if there was any query, they should go to the officer responsible for conflicts of interest, managing conflicts of interest, rather than the GARC. I just queried the value of that last bit of what that does, what benefit that gives from a governance perspective.
Well, I suppose it's all part of the overall assurance process. And me and Peter talked about this yesterday around a sort of biannual sort of review of the register and its links to adequate consideration around the conflicts of interest raised. I do take your point. So I think the key thing is that the Finance Committee will probably keep a more up-to-date operational oversight of the procurement side of things, but you do have to have a published register on your website. So whether that's the Finance Committee that keeps a regular eye on that, or the Governance and Audit Committee with its overarching audit and assurance process and responsibilities, I suppose is optional. I don't know, Peter, if you've got a particular view on this following our conversation.
No strong views on this one, actually. I mean, where there's tender waivers, where there are tender waivers, for example, they're brought to the Governance and Audit Committee as a matter of course anyway. I think when we last spoke on this, Matthew, I said, you know, regular basis. Well, I wouldn't expect to do it more than twice a year, I'm not quite sure where this has come from or who's been pushing for it. So, you know, if it has a sponsor, I think the sponsor should step up and say why they think we should be doing it.
I suppose the main thing at the moment, Peter, is that we haven't had a committee keep an eye necessarily, and I don't mean that in a bad way, but it doesn't have a regular eye on our procurement decisions other than what you get through our decision-making process. And we do have to, under the guidance around conflicts of interest, have this procurement register published and kept regularly up to date on our website. So there does need to be a committee that keeps an assurance view of this. Now, whether that's the finance or the governance and audit, it doesn't matter as long as there is a committee. So would be happy to keep it to the finance committee.
No, it can go to Clark then.
Well, can we choose one? And I would be happy either way. So as the recommendation stands, do you not agree to it, or do we need to change it to say just one committee, and that can be the governance and audit? Are there any strong feelings, or do you want me to bring something back with a revised wording on this one?
There's no comments in the chat box. I can't see anybody putting their hands up, so I don't think anybody's offering further opinion. So no,
I don't know the position of the governing body on this one, Andy.
No, I'm not sure that I do, and it's slightly difficult. The paper, it's a difficult thing to get through, isn't it, in a governing body meeting, in terms of there being quite detailed recommendations, which each one we could enter a discussion about. So perhaps what we could do is we could defer that. It sounds like there probably needs to be a discussion between Peter and Suzanne and yourself about where that might appropriately and best fit. And perhaps, there is no urgency to agree this today, is there? So that item could come back after further discussion. Is that correct?
I'm comfortable with that.
Can we involve Linda in the discussion?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Linda's nodding her head, so yes.
Thank you very much.
Okay. Can I move on, please, Andy?
Yeah, move on.
Noreen, move on, please. Okay, so in terms of supplementary actions, hopefully you agree to the number 10, which is again on page 83, 84 of the pack. So again, these are like their house husbandry site work in terms of making sure our constitution, scheme of reservation and delegation are all updated to take account of any of the agreed actions from today. And again, in terms of number 2, the sequencing and frequency of meetings still need to be reviewed and updated, taking into account any of the impact on the agreed actions. So again, hopefully you do see the logic and all of that and approve those sort of recommendations. I'll go back to my earlier point about some of the system changes which might have an impact on some of the frequency of meetings. I think people have mostly agree there. So can we move on to the next one, please, Maureen? Next one. Okay, so one of the things that we did have about was again part of the committee husbandry and you know, making sure all our committee members are aware of what each committee is looking at. So there's a couple of recommendations around that information sharing to governing body members, and you know, part of what I'm asking you to agree today, is it 1A, 1B, or 2, or all the above? Again, it could be all the above if you wanted, but has anyone got a particular? So does everyone agree with option 1A? Option 1B? Or option 2?
Which you recommend, Matthew?
I would recommend option 1B, but I don't think everyone is particularly happy with the glass cubes as a technology. So 1A would probably be the easiest one, recognising that you will get inboxes full. So 1A is an easy fix.
Right, well, let's go with 1A then, Matthew. If it's the easy fix for now, let's just do that. And
okay, you know, let's move on then. 1A, I think
sorry, Matthew. I would just say I don't want my inbox filling up anymore. So I'd absolutely push for 1B. If not, I'd like an increase in my capacity for my inbox, please.
I'll see what we can do about your inbox, Mike. Might need to pick that up outside of the meeting. I think.
Can we just agree with the people who wish to receive it in some way? The technology we can sort out outside of the meeting.
Okay. Noreen, move on to the next slide, please. Okay, I do not intend to go through all these different definitions, but absolutely throughout our conversations, we've had some confusion sometimes in papers that come to committees and the ask, and you know, the ask today really is for us to have an agreed terminology about what approve means, ratify means, etc. So for the next 2 slides, we've identified what you normally get as part of your committee papers. The ask really is for the governing body to agree with these definitions as presented. This will then get included into the corporate standards manual, and for committee paper writers, they get that guidance to make sure that what they are presenting to your various committees, including the governing body, there is some standardisation around the ask. So the recommendation is, do you approve our definitions as identified in these 2 slides and in the paper?
Matthew, I do, but I think the key thing here is about the guidance. So I think today we've had a couple of issues where we've asked to note and it should have been approved. So I think there's something about guidance, and I think there's something about the exec lead and the committee chair reading the papers before they come to governing body, please, and making those changes in advance.
Okay, that can be
into your guidance
part of the process around the corporate standards manual. So well, I've added that onto that, Claire. So okay, can I move on to not the next slide after that, please, Noreen?
I had a comment on that one, Matthew.
Sorry, Tracy.
Apologies. We need something. I don't mind if we use one of them, but we need to be clear that some things are there to provide assurance. So I don't, you know, for me that's almost another category. I don't want to elongate the discussion, but papers are provided to give assurance as well, and sometimes we call that for information, but I think there is something about doing that which is not necessarily a decision or endorsing it, but I just wonder if you can consider that so that that's covered.
I would agree with Tracy's plan.
I think that's important.
I will work with Dylan on that and circulate it outside the meeting for everyone to agree. So okay, so one of the big things that we did pick up throughout all the engagement was the issue around performance, and Peter's alluded to this earlier on in the meeting, in terms of where does performance sort of sit in which our committees. I think it's important to note that, you know, performance will still come to the governing body, and you don't see this in the recommendations. It's not saying that the governing body would never see performance information and data again. But in terms of what we engaged with over the previous months and the feedback we received, there are a number of options that we whittled down to as to where does performance sit within our committee structure. So these are the options that came back, and that there is an ask of the governing body today to agree which one of these options you got. Now, there was a general support in terms of option 1, in terms of considering it as part of the Quality Safeguarding Committee, but there were other views as well. So today, if we can agree what option, and then we can progress the necessary changes. I'm not seeing anybody disagreeing, so I'll try and make it easy. Does everyone agree with option 1 in terms of including performance, taking out the Strategic Commission and Performance Committee and putting into the Quality and Safeguarding Committee? Now, is that hands approving or is that hands questions? Hands approving. Okay. I think most people are agreeing with that, although Neil, you look like you've got
definitely be disagreeing, because I think this is a point of contention that it would be a point of discussion.
I've got Neil got his question.
Sorry, I just wanted to summarise. I think that the feedback I'd given isn't really represented here, and I know some people had come back confirming they agreed with what I was stating. I think we're taking a very narrow view of what performance means with what we're describing here. I think we're talking about NHS constitutional and service quality performance rather than a broader definition. So my feedback was financial performance would be in a finance committee. Delivery of our annual plan will probably sit in the strategic commissioning committee. As described here, the constitutional stuff probably sits within a quality safeguarding and performance committee. The oversight framework or improvement and assessment framework probably sits with the governing body. So what we need to do is actually define which elements of performance sit with which committee, rather than just have a very narrow view of what performance is based on a few nationally defined metrics.
Matthew, can I suggest, we are now completely over time for the meeting, and actually over the time we should have started our next meeting, which runs into another meeting, which runs into another meeting. I'm very conscious of that. There is no time urgency to this. We've had some levels of agreement, and there are a number of points which I think it feels like require further discussion. I wonder whether this is we should bring back the governance paper, and we can sort of ratify our own decisions of today, and perhaps have more time to discuss some of those items. And it sounds like perhaps there might need to be some discussion further, as we've already said, with some of the committee chairs as well about and some.
And that's fine. I suppose, in terms of Neil's comments, they are covered really in Appendix A, which is on page 87. So I take your earlier point, and 20 odd pages, it's quite hard to go through. So happy to bring it back. I think sort of Neil is sort of indicating in terms of option 3, there's a performance element across all committees really, but happy to bring that back indeed, in the interest of time. But I've got some agreement. It's the bits I'll bring back that we haven't got agreement today on, rather than the whole paper.
Yeah, you could bring it back, highlighting those bits where we've agreed, and then more importantly, highlighting the bits where there's either been further discussion outside of between now and the next meeting, or requires decision at the next meeting. Perhaps you can focus on those decisions for the next meeting, and with some clear recommendations, if that's possible, from if they're not too many different points of view on that. Is that acceptable to colleagues? We move on. Thank you very much for that, Matthew.
Thank you, Andy.
That takes us then to I completely lost my place. I've gone on to the next meeting, sorry, thinking ahead. To the decisions taken under the delegated authority of the executive team. It's on page 104 of your pack. It's for governing bodies review and awareness of those decisions that have been taken. I will pause if there's any comments or concerns or anything else. No, I'm not getting any comments or any hands up, so I will take those that we've been aware of those. We'll move to 6.1, which is the forward planner, which is on page 108, which is for your information, unless there are comments. Thank you. That takes us to any of the business. Nothing has been notified to me in advance. So unless something has occurred very urgently, Claire?
Sorry, Andrew, I don't think in the forward plan for January we have anything around the ICS and anything we have to consider, I think, you know, JCC, MOU. I mean, it'll be too late for the sort of the consultation piece around the integrating care document, but I think we need something around Cheshire and Mersey.
Absolutely would agree. We're going to do some of that informal work between now and then, but that needs to be there
We
as
are,
a
but
consideration.
we are asked to consider in both January and February, depending on timings of the HCP sort of governance.
Absolutely. Yeah, thank you for that. Absolutely. So we need to add that in. Anything further for the forward planner? Lovely, thank you. If there's no other business, that closes our business for the public part. We are, of course, asked to pass a resolution to exclude the public for the confidential nature of the business to be discussed in accordance with National Health Services Clinical Commissioning Group Regulations 2012, section 16.1. Are we happy to do that? In which case we will leave this meeting and join the Teams meeting. I'm sure that colleagues will want 5 minutes break for comfort, and if we can join at 10:55 for the next meeting, and we will have that one. So thank you very much, and thank you for the public who have been present. Thank you very much.